No, I'm just waiting for 6 o'clock. We typically, we don't start before 6. So. Okay, it's 6 o'clock now. So I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitowoc Springs City Council for April the 16th, 2024. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Elena, would you please call the roll?
City Council members Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada, Julie Wolf,
Here.
Natalie Johnson,
Here.
Michelle Weatherholt,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune,
Present.
and Mayor John Graham.
Present, thank you. Okay, so next item, or actually the first business item, approval of agenda. I believe everyone in council's had an opportunity to review the agenda, so I would seek a motion to approve.
I move approval.
Moved by Councillor Johnson,
Second.
seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. Elena, do you want us to vote electronically? Okay, we'll vote, please.
And motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. Next item is public comment on non-agenda items. This is time during the meeting when anyone in the audience is welcome to speak on any non-agenda item for up to 3 minutes. We typically don't respond, but you're welcome to speak. Anyone interested? It's not Elena. Did we receive any communication? Okay, great. Thank you. In that case, we'll move on. Next item is the consent calendar. We have 5 items tonight. First is the presentation of warrants. The second is approval of the April 2nd, 2024 City Council regular meeting minutes. Third is requesting approval of the general services agreement with Miller Pipeline LLC for the construction of the Mesa Water Transmission Line improvements, the Rev 1 project. Fourth item is to consider adopting resolution number 0824, a resolution of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, designating the city's agent for receipt of notices of claims under the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. And fifth, requesting approval to purchase the trailer previously rented by the police department for the public services sign shop. So if there's any item that any council member would like to take off and discuss separately, we can do that. If not, I would look for a motion to accept and approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Okay, seconded by Councillor Shada. Let's go ahead and vote.
And the motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you. Okay. So we're down to business item G1, digital accessibility transition plan presentation and adoption consideration. I believe Mitchell Carter, our PIO, will lead us off.
Mayor, if I could do the quick introduction and then I'll turn it over to Mitchell, if that's okay.
Please. Okay.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are and how we got here. In mid-October, we discussed this during the budget retreat and we told you about this new law that's coming down. Late October, we also did this during the work session and we talked about it. In January, we had a discussion regarding this ADA requirement in the law. And we talked about an ADA or accessibility specialist position. Tonight, Mitchell, and as you know, Alex was working on this. Alex left, so Mitchell has taken over the project. He will be going through that. We'll have the state here and we'll have various other people here to present. I do want to talk about tonight what we need from council. We need the adoption of the plan, which is really important to move forward, or to make recommendations on the plan, and then a direction of how to proceed. How would you like us to proceed? We'll give you several options. We have not done all the due diligence and the research because I didn't want to spend the time on that until we had some direction from council of how to move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitchell and he'll do the introductions and we'll move forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mitchell?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Mitchell Carter, Public Information
Mitchell, I
Officer.
think if you could maybe get the mic about
Yeah.
3 inches from your mouth there. This is being recorded for live or TV audience, excuse me.
All right. Hello, everybody. Mitchell Carter, Public Information Officer for the City of Manitou Springs. Thank you for that introduction. Denise, I want to give kudos to Alex, my predecessor, as well as Denise for the foresight that the two of them had in regards to HB 21-1110, which is the House bill from the state regarding digital accessibility. And in the short time that I've been with this organization, I have fielded numerous phone calls and numerous emails from various other governmental entities across the state asking what Manitou Springs is doing. Where are you in this process? I've heard good things about what you're doing. Can you share with me what you're doing and why is it so good? So that to me shows that this organization wants to be ahead of the game. And we have a July 1st deadline to adopt this plan because there's much bigger ramifications beyond just the plan. We are talking about the accessibility of our digital content for the public, for our constituents, for our residents. With the increase of accessibility comes the increase of community engagement, being able to engage with the citizens who may have accessibility issues now and able to fix those going into the future. So with that, we have brought Karen Pellegrin from the state of Colorado Office of Information Technology, OIT, to talk high level about what HB 21-1110 is all about, why it's important, and why the state is moving in that direction. So I believe Karen is with us via Zoom.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Karen Pellegrin. I am the manager of the Technology Accessibility Program out of the Governor's Office of IT. And I'm here to talk a little bit, as he said, about HB 21-1110. The bill
Can I
came.
interrupt for a quick second? Can we pull her
Sure.
up so everybody can see her right now? We can only see the presentation. Sorry, Karen.
No worries. Just let me know when you're ready.
Okay, we're set. We can see you now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. So back in 2021, so 3 years ago, the bill came out. So that's why it's called HB 21-1110. It came out of a desire for the disability community to really push forward in something that has been around for over 30 years. So the ADA has been around for a long time. The WCAG guidelines, which are the guidelines that we use to make product or to kind of test against and make these products accessible, these digital products, it's been around since 1999. So people with disabilities have been waiting for a long time to gain access to government, and government is supposed to be here for the people. When we passed this law, it was not only for people with disabilities who are our constituents, people out in the community, but also for our fellow employees. Employees and people in the community weren't able to access things for their job. They weren't able to, renew their state ID, pay their taxes, participate in elections. It was a very painful experience. So after a lot of work, the disability community came together with state legislators to bring this bill forward, and it was passed. It's now statute. I will say that from that point to where we are today, things have progressed quite a bit. things have changed a little bit because earlier this year, we also passed some rules. OIT went through the rulemaking process and we promulgated rules to give further clarification and guidance on how to meet compliance with the statute. So now what we're saying with these rules is if you comply with the rules, you comply with the statute. The original statute said everything had to be 100% accessible for all digital products we had, both internal and external. That is still true, but what we've learned is this is a tall order. And just we compare this to cybersecurity. Back when cybersecurity first came around, cybersecurity was very new. It was a culture change. We had to make a lot of changes in IT departments. We had to change the culture throughout the organization. Every entity has to now do cybersecurity training. There are practices they have to put in place to ensure that they're protecting data and so on and so forth. Similarly, we are now in this place with accessibility. We need to change the culture. There's a lot of work to be done. And so with the rules, what we've come to now is we need to create this plan, this transition plan to start operationalizing accessibility throughout the organization. And what that means is we're training people to know how to make accessible products, to make sure that we are procuring accessible products, that we're training people as they're onboarded, that we're hiring people with the right skills, that we have processes in place whenever we build digital products, whether they're applications, websites, documents, kiosks, whatever you've got. So we're saying now, you need to have a transition plan so that you can start addressing accessibility as a continuous process. This is something that is not just a one and done effort. This is something that we're going to be continuing to do in perpetuity, the same way as we address cybersecurity. We're doing that in perpetuity. So what we're asking for is for entities in Colorado, state agencies, local government, what have you, to start working these plans to incorporate accessibility in every element of your organization so that you create these accessible products. However, we know you're not going to get every product accessible 100%. There's technically no such thing as 100% accessibility 100% of the time because technology is always changing. So we need these processes in place to be able to build, test, release, fix, update products to make them as accessible as we can. So that means that you need to have a plan, implement this plan. This plan would include accommodations so that you know how to support people when you don't have a fully accessible product. And I'll give you an example. If you have a website, and it's mostly accessible, but there are maybe 3 or 4 small things that in that website that's not fully accessible. And somebody who is a screen reader user can't get the information they need because of those barriers in that website. How are you going to help them? This is where accommodations come into place. So as we're doing all of this work, we need to continue to know what our products are, to continue to address those products for accessibility by fixing the issues, testing where those issues are, so on and so forth. And then when we can't get those fixes in place in a reasonable amount of time, we have this accommodations plan. So this is all of the work that we at the state are doing with our state agencies, local government is doing, so on and so forth. So it takes a lot. It takes, I mean, this is cliche, but it takes a village. It's going to take everyone working on this in different roles, different tasks that they're going to be doing. And it's going to include continuously monitoring your websites, checking for accessibility issues. There's lots of great tools out there. I see Mark Balsano is here from Nelnet. He's one of those companies that provides a lot of these kind of services, but we work with these companies and we work with our internal people to continually address and fix the accessibility issues so that we make sure that people with disabilities, again, whether they're an employee or the public, can access the products and services that we provide. That's everything in a nutshell. And I'm open up to questions. So go ahead.
Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely.
Mitchell,
we-
I'm wondering if you have more, maybe we'll wait for questions.
I was just going to say, can we wait for questions until we've done the
Yeah,
presentation?
Go ahead
Go
and
for it.
tell us what you need to tell us, and then we'll have some back and forth. Thanks.
Yeah. So part of that accommodation plan that Karen has mentioned, you know, part of the process that the city needs to do in the immediate is set up a process for people that have a complaint about an inaccessible document for whatever they may have a disability for. And that's something that we are working on currently. It is in the transition plan in front of you. There's much more to the plan than just that, but that is kind of the big first bite. We do have a presentation from our consultant, Nelnet. The city has contracted with Nelnet for a while now for the staff trainings on how to create accessible Word documents as well as PDFs. I will caution that while staff has gone through that training, like Karen mentioned, it really is not just a one and done. This is an opportunity for us to be accessible forever. And that training is going to be required for new hires. Then it should be a consideration at a minimum for an annual retraining for the staff who create those types of documents. So with that, I would like to introduce Stacy with Nelnet, and she may have other members join her, but I'll let her introduce her team.
All right, thank you, Mitchell. Hello, and I guess good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I'm Stacy Spory. I am an accessibility team lead here representing Nelnet Government Services. And my team has had the pleasure of working with Manitou Springs staff.
Stacy, could you
Yeah.
speak a little closer to the microphone?
Yeah, I
Pull it
can
towards you.
keep it
About
up.
3 inches seems to be about the right amount.
All right, is this
Distance.
better?
That okay with you, council? Can you all hear okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
No, it's just take get a little getting used to.
All right. Yeah. So my team has had the pleasure of working with Manitou Springs staff since July of last year. And so this presentation is going to kind of go through a little bit of what we've done. I'm going to provide a transition plan walkthrough, which is the document you should have all received a copy of. And then we will talk through some proposed next steps for the city. And then kind of before I get to that, I'm just going to start off with a little bit of a digital accessibility overview. Karen gave an excellent introduction. I'm going to echo a lot of the points she shared. But I just kind of want to set the stage about some of the ways that people access digital content and what some of the needs are here. Next slide, please. Before I jump into that, I just want to share this quote. It's by the late Judith Heumann, an international disability rights activist, and it's something that has always resonated with me very strongly and speaks to the reason that I work in the field that I do. And the quote reads, "For people without disabilities, technology makes things convenient, whereas for people with disabilities, it makes things possible." And it's really that possibility that is so important here. We are using technology to the fullest extent to open up that possibility to all members of our communities. All right, next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of intro about disability and digital access, I pulled some stats from the CDC. We have a little over 1 million adults in Colorado that have a disability, and this is equal to nearly 1 in 4 adults. So it is definitely something that impacts all communities in Colorado. And it's important. Oh, can you go back, please? Yeah, thank you. And now not every disability is going to impact someone's ability to access digital content, but many of them do. So there are many ways to categorize disability, and disability is really a very diverse concept and it impacts everyone individually. But when we're looking at online content, digital content, it's really helpful to kind of think about the different ways that we interact with that content and how disability can impact that. So visual disabilities, whether your eyes, you can't see as well, some impact like cataracts or other forms of visual disability that lead to low vision can impact how you can see something on the screen. For someone who's blind or has a very limited amount of vision, they may need to rely on a different form of representation using a screen reader for audio output. An auditory disability for someone who's deaf or hard of hearing is going to have similar impacts, but just for that audio side of things. So any audio content you're sharing needs to have some other representation that can be made available to that person. Mobility disabilities tend to impact someone's ability to interact with a computer, their smartphone, or other digital devices. So this may mean they might not be using a mouse like you typically would with your laptop or a trackpad or at your desktop computer. And maybe they rely on a keyboard or some other form of customized access that works for them. Cognitive disability is obviously an extremely broad category. It can impact people in so many ways, but there are also considerations there when it comes to online content and how we're presenting things. Are they distracting? Are things cleanly organized? Considerations like that can make a big difference for someone with a cognitive disability. And the final thing I want you to keep in mind is that many people who are disabled may also have multiple disabilities. So someone who is deaf-blind has additional considerations, and maybe the audio representation from a screen reader doesn't work for them, but they can get a Braille representation so they have that tactile output. Or different combinations may lead to unique challenges and also unique solutions. Next slide, please. So a little bit about just some of the assistive technologies that people with disabilities might use include something like screen readers, which read out all of the content on the screen along with additional information that's conveyed visually. A Braille display will connect with that screen reader and translate that output into Braille, which can be felt with your fingers. Speech recognition is useful for someone, especially with a mobility disability, so they can command their computer using their voice. Magnification and zoom are common tools that someone with low vision may use. And then there are also many other assistive technologies available, and especially more custom ones such as eye gaze tracking for using really the movement of your eyes to interact with your computer. All right. On the next slide, I have a video that I prepared. It's just a demo that I produced showing a couple different ways someone may interact with their computer. So if you could please play the video.
For this demonstration, I will go over a couple different ways the same task may be performed. To set the stage, let's say that I am a resident looking for more information about the City Council, and specifically, I'm looking for the link to attend a City Council meeting remotely. So I'm going to go over a couple ways that someone with a disability might find this link using either assistive technologies or other modifications that fit their needs. So the first scenario I'm going to demonstrate is using a combination of Zoom to view the page, and then also a keyboard for navigating within the page. Someone may choose to zoom in on the page, especially if they have a visual disability that makes it harder to read text at the default size. So in this case, the text has been increased to double the size, and I may find this more comfortable to read. I may need to zoom in even further than 200%, but that's just where I'm going to use for this demonstration. Keyboard navigation represents many common ways of navigating that don't require relying on a mouse and the ability to point and click. So this may be someone with a mobility disability who does not have easy use of their hands or the fine motor control needed to use a mouse. And so they're either using a keyboard or an assistive technology that emulates the controls that a keyboard gives available to you. So this could be something like a customized switch setup where pressing different buttons may interact with the page in ways that mimic how a keyboard user would. So what I'm going to begin doing is tabbing through this page. I can see that there is a government menu item, and this seems like a good place to start looking for information about the city council meetings. As I tab through the page, you can see that there are borders drawn around items, and this is very important to help me track where I am on the page and know what I'll be interacting with if I press enter. But once I reach this menu item, I actually don't have an easy way to get to the items within that menu. I'm using some other key commands and I just can't get there. So I could troubleshoot and try to figure this out, but in this case, I'm just going to keep going through the page and maybe I can find something else that will help me. So as I continue tabbing through the page, I jump down where we have these large cards here. And the second one says City Council Meetings live streams. This is perfect. Let's follow that link. And now I have loaded the new page. I'm at the top of the page. The combination of my zoom level and my screen size means that I can't see the content yet, but I can tab through this page and eventually reach the main content area, which shows me, great, this is the City Council page. And as I tap down, I actually reach this link to the City Council live stream. So I've accomplished my goal. Okay, so the second thing I want to demonstrate is how someone who uses a screen reader might interact with the page, especially if they are blind or visually impaired so that they have very little ability to use their sight for navigation and really rely on that audio representation. So I'm going to return to the home page and I will reset our zoom level. And then I am going to start NVDA. NVDA is a freely available screen reader, and what it does is it reads out content on my screen. So you just heard the chime when it started. And what I would do is start navigating with the page, actually very similar to how I just did with the keyboard, but this time I will also have additional shortcuts that the screen reader has built in to make it more efficient to navigate the page. And so as I enter this page,
Manitou Springs Co. official website, Google Chrome.
NVDA will start reading out information about what page I'm on. It will begin reading the page. I am going to skip past that. So I went to the ManitouSpringsGov.com website, and maybe I'm thinking search is a good way to find what I am looking for. So I am actually going to try and use some landmark shortcuts to jump around the page and see if that can help me find the search very easily.
Banner landmark homepage, main navigation landmark menu, search region, search edit, search.
All right, and there I have found the search. So now I'm going to enter this input field and type in City Council and send the search off.
Search ITYUL. Search Manitou Springs Co. Civic Engage.
So that has submitted the search. It's brought me to a new page with the search results. As typically expected, I start back at the top of the page and NVDA would automatically read the content. But again here, I'm going to use some shortcuts to make it more efficient for me to navigate the page and see if I can jump to the essential information that I want quicker. So first, I'm going to see if there's a main heading on this page and see if I can jump to that.
Main landmark search link. Go back to the search homepage heading level 1.
Well, all the content it read for that search heading was a little bit confusing, but I'm probably in the right place. And what I'm going to do is see if there's any links here that might be listed as search results and help me find that City Council page.
Graphic site content link tab. Select graphic agendas minutes link tab. Graphic municipal code link tab. Arrow right site content property page City Council visited link heading level 3.
All right, it sounds like this is a link to the City Council page, so I'm going to follow that link.
Heading City Council Manitou Springs Co. Visited link skip to main content button.
And then I'm going to see if I can jump to the main heading again.
Main landmark City Council heading level 1. All upcoming City Council meetings are scheduled to be hybrid. If you want to watch the meeting live stream, and do not intend to participate or provide comment during the meeting, please visit our link. City Council live stream opens a new window.
And then when I read the content below it, I am in a paragraph that leads me to my link for the City Council live stream, and that will help me accomplish my goal. That is just a few different ways that a disabled person may access a computer. And while these may be different ways to use a computer than you are familiar with, these are very important ways. Accessible digital content is critical to providing equal access to information and services.
Okay, next slide, please. You might have to click it again. Thank you. I'm not going to talk a lot about laws, regulations, and standards. I think Karen already did a great job of that. But one thing I did just want to highlight, since it really changed since I put this slide together, ADA Title II, they had put out a notice of proposed rulemaking in 2023 or July of last year about also adopting the WCAG standards as a technical standard. And just last week, I believe that rule became official. Next slide, please. The other thing I really want to talk about, though, is our web content accessibility guidelines. And when we're kind of tying this back to technology making things possible, the assistive technology is a big piece of it. But the part that relies kind of within our responsibility is making sure that the content we produce also interacts well with that assistive technology and has the information needed to convey all of those additional things. So if you think about a document with a heading on it, you often use a larger font, other styling cues, spacing cues, and then making sure that's also represented another way, basically telling the computer that I do intend this to be a heading. Then a screen reader can come along, it picks up that information, and it can provide those additional cues to someone who relies on that screen reader. And our web content accessibility guidelines is really our standard that helps us figure out how to do this. Unfortunately, it is a fairly complex technical standard. There are 87 success criteria overall. When we're looking at the level AA level, it's a little bit less, around 50, I believe. But each update since 2.0, so we're currently on 2.2, has also added additional success criteria. And this is for a couple of reasons, but some of the big ones are just to keep up with new technologies, how things are changing, and then also to better cover the needs of different disabilities. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is an excellent standard. It is internationally recognized and referred to, but it's not perfect, and it almost always feels like there's more that we can do. So the next thing I just want to show to you, and I would ask that we just play about 5 minutes of this video, but this is from a video that Robin had put together going over documents and just shows a little bit of the technical things you do when working with a document that's been created in Word, converted to PDF, and then kind of performing checks to make sure everything is set up correctly.
Now we'll open up our PDF in Adobe Acrobat. The first thing we can do is check the accessibility checker. And to do that, we'll go to All Tools from the top navigation. Then we'll choose Prepare for Accessibility from the menu. In the Prepare for Accessibility menu, we're going to choose Check for Accessibility. The Accessibility Checker Options dialog pops up. We change nothing, we just choose Start Checking. And then the accessibility checker pane pops up on the right, and we should only have the 2 document issues that are always going to be there of logical reading order, which needs a manual check, and color contrast, which needs a manual check, in which we have already done on the Word side. So I'll close out of the accessibility checker and move on to our manual checks. The first manual check I want to do is to check the tag order. So I'll go over to my side panel and choose the accessibility tag. Next button, which will then bring up our accessibility tags pane. And I can go through each of these tags and find that they're correct. The headings are correct. The paragraphs are correct. They're in order that they appear on the screen. If I find the list on page 2 and expand that, I find that there are 4 list item tags corresponding with each of the bullets for the list. And if I expand each of the list item tags, I'll find that there are L body tags with the content specific to each of those bullets and their text. And that's all correct. We have a link in this document within the last paragraph chunk. So I can expand that paragraph, go to the link tag, expand that link tag, and find that we've got the content and the link object reference, which is correct. We also find that there's an inline shape tag for this decorative line, but we'll get to that in just a moment. As we were going through the document, we found that there is an P tag that's right next to this figure in the document. And if we expand it in our tags pane, we find that it is actually empty. So as a best practice, we can go ahead and artifact it. Otherwise, we'll be hearing a blank with our screen reader test. Blank would be reading to assistive technologies. So we can go ahead and right click that blank content box under the P tag. And then from the context menu, choose change tag to artifact. The create artifact dialog pops up. We choose OK. Now we're left with just the empty P tag that we can then right click and choose delete empty tags to get rid of it. The next thing that we notice, actually, the tags begin with an H1. And this historic Manitou Springs at the foot of Pikes Peak logo was not actually tagged as a figure. And this is natural, this happens. Any header and footer content from Word is automatically not going to be tagged on the PDF side, but that's okay, we can tag it. So from our Prepare for Accessibility menu on the left, we're going to choose the Fix Reading Order tool. The reading order dialog pops up. We can select the historic Manitou Springs logo, and then from the reading order dialog, choose figure. Now in our tags pane, we have that first figure tagged as a figure. The logo is now a figure that's tagged.
We can pause the
We
video.
can
here,
close out of the
please.
reading order dialog at this point.
Thank you.
Now we'll open up our PDF in Adobe Acrobat.
We wait for the screen to come up. I'll just say this is the training that we went through. How many weeks? 10, 13?
13
The
weeks.
first thing we can do is
So we went through all of this every week. We were going through training.
check the accessibility checker. And to do that, we'll
Thank you so much. I know those videos can be challenging in PowerPoint. So really the last thing I want to talk a little bit about before we jump into the next section of the presentation is just a little bit about what it takes to have an accessible organization strategy, because you really do need a strategy to have a roadmap for accomplishing all of these various things. So really the first step we have out here is to understand your current level of digital accessibility. And this is where Nelnet has worked with Manitou Springs to perform an assessment of various sites and provided information on that. The next piece is to remediate existing content based on priority. And so typically there are quite a few accessibility issues, and prioritizing them is really important so that you can fix the most impactful things first. But it is also important to keep in mind those less impactful things and work on getting them eventually fixed as well. Another really important piece is to be able to train employees on the role that they need to play, so they know what they need to do to produce accessible content. And the other things you really need to look at are both process And then also how you handle accessibility requests. So building accessibility into processes across the city will make sure that it's something that is always there. And then finally, that request process is super important to have a good way to handle it, because as I mentioned, the web content accessibility guidelines are complex. Karen mentioned too, 100% compliance is often not a realistic goal. It's a great thing to shoot for, but you don't really expect to get there. It's more of a shoot for the stars sort of thing. And so having a process in place to help someone who reaches out and says, hey, I was trying to access this content and it didn't work for me, and to be able to get an efficient response to give them the access they need is really important. And again, there's also just areas where even with all of the guidelines we have, someone's specific disability may not be well covered. And so being able to support them in those situations is important as well. All right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about our accessibility project. Next slide, please. Just kind of an overview of the items we went through. We performed web and document assessments. We performed some additional assessments of the Civic Plus tools. We also did some collaboration with Civic Plus and IDOI, meeting with their representatives to talk through some of our findings and what they can do to fix things on their end. As mentioned, we performed document creation training, going from Word to PDF, and then finally the piece I'm presenting here today, which is the transition plan development. Next slide, please. So for our web and document assessment, we assessed a representative sample of content from the main website, the volunteer fire department website, municipal code site, document center, parking forms, and See-Click Fix. We also assessed an example of the email newsletter that is delivered through MailChimp, and a few templates, including press release, agenda templates, and the RFP template. For performing these assessments, we focused on a representative sample because we find that typically the same types of issues occur repeatedly across documents, across the whole site. So really you focus on the sample, get an idea of what it is, and then you have a guide for what you need to fix for the rest of that site, or generally what you need to improve about your document creation process. So I'm just going to dig a little bit into our main website findings. Just kind of a high level summary. We did have 18 high priority findings, and we found that the greatest impacts were likely going to be for people with visual impairments, and that includes both blind individuals and then also people with low vision. The other biggest impacts were to people with mobility impairments, and especially where there were issues with keyboard navigation of the website. Some of the key highlights we mentioned in our summary was especially to focus on improving heading structure and accessible labels. And heading structure is especially going to be something that's part of content creation, having that good structure. Accessible labels may be part of that content creation as well, though some of that may rely also on Civic Plus side for some of the additional, kind of the UI they build around your content. Improving keyboard and screen reader accessibility of the navigation menu. This is a super important item because that is how people will navigate your site and find the items they need. Kind of as I demonstrated in my video though, it's great to have multiple ways to get to something, because if there is an issue, if someone can maybe use the search instead or use a site map, or it's one of the promoted links on your homepage, they may be able to work around that in the short term and still get the information they need. So just a couple of our selected findings I just wanted to highlight for you. These are just a couple from the report to give you a sense of what these reports contain. We have one is about users cannot get to the navigation menu sub-items with a screen reader open. So this is kind of an issue we found in our testing that made it much more difficult to navigate that menu, and is one of the ones we did discuss with Civic Plus, especially since they have a lot of control over how that menu is structured. And this one, we prioritize all of our findings. This one is ranked as high because it has a pretty significant impact to how someone accesses the site. Another high priority finding from this report was about elements that were hidden from assistive technology. So this is a bit of a technical one, but really there was some code that is being applied that is basically set up to say, hey, we don't want this piece of content to be picked up by assistive technology. There's sometimes good reasons to do that because of how a site is structured or just things that are very repetitive. But in this case, it actually removed important information from the page. So someone using a screen reader, that screen reader will respect that property, and it just skips over that entire chunk of content and never reads it. Next slide, please. For Civic Plus tool assessments and collaboration, really our goal here for the assessments was to dig a little bit more into how Manitou Springs can use these tools to produce accessible content. So those were the reports we provided on the content management system and forms builder, really looking at what are some of the best options to select and what are some options you might want to avoid because we found the content they created was a bit inaccessible. As I mentioned, we also met with representatives from Civic Plus, including Civic Clerk, C-Click-Fix, and AudioEye to discuss some of our findings, provide some additional guidance and advice for remediation. One thing I do want to note is that we performed initial meetings with them, and I believe we had a follow-up meeting with C-Click-Fix to answer some additional questions. But when their fixes are completed, they should be retested and verified at some point to make sure that you now have accessible content. And the last one I just kind of want to note quick, I think AudioEye as an accessibility overlay is something to pay close attention to. We found in some cases it would try to automatically fix things, but end up creating problems in the process of doing that. And so I do think there's a need for a process to at least at a minimum to periodically review how AudioEye is changing things and notify them if there are issues. When we talked to them, they were very quick to make fixes, even fixing some of the issues while we were on the call with them. But it does seem like it's something that has to be communicated to them so that they can stay on top of making those changes. Just a little bit about the document training we provided. As mentioned, it was 13 training sessions running from December to March, and it provided step-by-step guidance on how to create an accessible Word document, convert that document to PDF, and perform any of the final steps needed to ensure that PDF is accessible. And we provided this in a workshop format with hands-on exercises and the opportunity for live feedback, which we find to be very effective. And we also provided session recordings, handouts, and example documents. So you do have those recordings available for retraining in the future. All right, so the next section, I would like to just kind of provide a high-level walkthrough of the content in the transition plan. So let's see if I can get the mic to stay in place here. So there's really 3 primary sections of this document where a lot of the meat is, and then a couple additional sections. So the introduction is really focused on providing that overview of applicable laws, regulations, and standards. The Manitou Springs Digital Accessibility Assessment talks a lot about where you are today based on the assessment results. And then it also lays out a timeline for remediation. The process development plan is where you get more into what are the processes the city needs to consider implementing to really ensure long-term accessibility, to kind of make it part of everyone's role and have everyone contributing. And this is something we provided really more of an outline, very high-level process suggestions. And this is something I would suggest that the city looks at however they want to move forward on some of these items, such as an ADA coordinator. You know, once you figure that out, that person or that group of people can work at figuring out how to flesh out these processes and what works for the city. And then kind of the remaining session, we talk about the digital accessibility request process and complaint process, which are super important. And then also reporting on progress and updates to the transition plan. Because of course, it's very essential to also have not just have the plan, but show that you are making progress and that you are working towards compliance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So one thing I would like to point out, in the assessment section, we have kind of a breakdown, at a high level of the different reviews that we did, how many issues were found, and then also breaking that down by the main user groups who are impacted by them. One thing that is really important that I would like to note is that, as I mentioned earlier, we performed a representative sample assessment. So a number like 4 total issues means that in our representative sample, there are 4 issues, but it doesn't tell us if one of those issues is maybe something you can fix in one place and it's fixed for everything on that site. Other issues may be something that do have to be fixed individually and could be across every page on that site. So I think that's very important context to keep in mind. The other thing I really want to highlight is to point out the milestone timeline. So in our discussions with Denise and Mitchell, we put together a timeline of dates for meeting these various remediation milestones. These are our suggestions based on the discussions we've had. It's really up to the city to determine, what are reasonable target dates for these activities, and do we need to adjust them? And I will talk a little bit more about aggressive versus less aggressive timelines in just a moment. So, and then kind of below that milestone timeline, we kind of provide more information about each of these milestones. And I also would like to highlight that some of these milestones have been met. For example, the city has reached out to their external vendors to inform them of the need for accessible content and where the issues were found. We did conduct an inventory of the software, and it's really working towards those remediation pieces and then also building the processes to support long-term accessibility. And the process development plan, as I mentioned, kind of at a high level gets into a few topics here, looking at the first one I really want to highlight is the responsibilities related to an ADA coordinator. So I am going to present, and we have up on the slides, a couple different options for an ADA coordinator. This does not necessarily need to be a single individual who's responsible for all of this. But you do need to make some decisions on how these responsibilities, who will be responsible for them and how that will be accomplished. So we did kind of break things also up by essential responsibilities and then additional duties. So it's possible, you could look at really those essential responsibilities first. And then as you kind of build things out, you can start looking more at those additional duties. How do we incorporate them to really achieve those long-term goals? I would also like to note that when it comes to testing and auditing, it's really important to consider some sort of process for periodic ongoing testing. So this is internal process for checking your documents, making sure that everyone understands the accessibility training they received and they are producing accessible documents. We're kind of noting where someone may need some additional help or just additional instruction on how to do something. Similar for your websites. And then also it's very good to make sure your vendors, they're frequently updating their products, their services. A lot of these services kind of get live updates. So having a periodic review process to make sure that they are meeting their accessibility commitments. And then of course, training is not a one and done thing. It is an ongoing effort, and will require, additional training when you have new hires so that they understand what they need to do. Yearly refresher training is very helpful. And then also any additional training that hasn't been covered so far. As I mentioned, we really focused on for this effort that document creation training, and specifically Word to PDF, as that seemed to cover the most common scenario. Finally, I would like to just jump to the digital accessibility request section and just highlight that we have provided information about digital accessibility requests, and the following section digs into the complaint process. So the complaint process is something that is required, and you do have it currently outlined on your site how to submit a complaint. And currently the digital accessibility request process really just says, you know, to make your request, there's no specific process. So kind of look at that complaint process. I highly recommend looking at developing a separate digital accessibility request process, really for when someone just has that initial reach out. They don't feel that this is something they want to make a complaint about yet. They just want to reach out to the city and either get assistance or be proactive and request an accommodation. So further outlining that process, making it easier to use would be another very valuable activity. And then finally, in the progress and update section, this is something that should be updated as you either make changes to your processes or when you make decisions on who will be responsible for ADA coordination tasks, or if that changes in the future. So updating the document and then also making sure to make updates as these target dates are met or not met. Go back to that timeline, record those, and show what progress you are making. All right, so for the final section, talking about next steps, the first thing I really want to talk about here is about a couple different options for an ADA coordinator. If you could just go back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. So there's a couple different options outlined on this slide, and the first one is departmental champions. So this would be a scenario where coordinator responsibilities are really shared. And the one thing I would caution you about is while those responsibilities are shared, so it's less of a burden on any one person, it is going to be a situation where no one person is going to have the full picture. And so I'd be really cautious about whether this will be sufficient, and especially for meeting your timelines for updating the transition plan. Is that going to happen as expected? Another option you can consider is a dedicated coordinator with a digital accessibility background. But in this case, you are going to be able to do a lot of this work in-house. They can be able to work with third parties when needed, but it's really important to hire someone who has that accessibility expertise and knowledge, or you will have to provide a lot of training to get them up to speed to handle most of these tasks. And it really is a full-time role when we look at it this way. The third option we also want to present for you, and I also want to say these are not, you know, the only options, but these are kind of the main ones based on the discussions we've had, would be to look at more of a hybrid approach. So you would still need someone in that coordinator role, or maybe a group of people depending on how you organize it. But that coordinator would work with a third party to provide a lot of the services. So here we're looking at the coordinator still needs to be responsible for maintaining inventory, tracking progress for the city, but then they reach out to third parties to provide these different technical tasks. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so I just wanted to show a little bit of a breakdown between like a dedicated coordinator versus looking at the hybrid approach. So a dedicated coordinator would still work with software vendors to verify that they're meeting their accessibility commitments, and they may provide that testing themselves. They could provide accessibility expertise across the city. So if someone has a question on how to do something, they know who to reach out to. And they may also be able to perform some of that remediation. When you're looking at it this way, though, is probably going to be on a much longer time frame, especially if it's just one person working on it. And the cost here essentially works out to whatever their yearly salary is. When we look at a hybrid approach, the coordinator would still be needed to perform tracking and facilitation, but the accessibility vendor can step in to help provide things like retesting and verification. So working with software vendors or retesting your content, and also provide some of that accessibility expertise to help answer questions. So this would probably require some part-time work from someone internally, but from our estimates, looking at an external vendor for this, we're estimating about $5,000 to $8,000 a month. And the one thing I just want to note that this is excluding remediation. Next slide, please. The other big piece here is to continue remediation efforts. So really think about how you want to determine those remediation target dates for high, medium, and low priority content. So this is not necessarily looking at the priority of individual issues, but really what content do you have that is the most used, the most important that we get it accessible first. And then you do have the options of choosing a more aggressive timeline versus a less aggressive timeline. And really, this is going to be, I think, a question of risk and how quickly you want to get some of these things done. As part of this, you also need to determine how you want remediation performed. So as I mentioned, the ADA coordinator can help provide remediation themselves, especially if there's someone working full-time in that role, or they might work with content creators to remediate content, or they could just be someone who works with a third party to remediate content. And whichever approach you choose will determine your total cost and risk. So looking at remediation, and then I also added some training costs on this slide. For remediation primarily, we provided some estimated costs for the high, medium, and low priority content based on the current data we have. And I just want to mention that the data we have doesn't include necessarily everything, and there are a few systems or websites that have not been evaluated yet. So this really includes like a high-level estimate for likely effort needed to evaluate, and then kind of more of a guess at what it would take to remediate. But what kind of comes down to is high priority content, which is a much narrower scope. It was about $35,000. For medium priority content, we were looking at more like $550,000. And then for low priority, it was around $54,600. And so our total comes up to a little over $154,000. And really in our estimates, this price doesn't change significantly based on timeline. Really, the timeline you're looking at is more of a question of risk. And of course, this cost can be reduced if you are able to do some of the remediation yourselves internally. It's just really important to consider what training, expertise, and time may be needed. And then we also have some additional recommended training on here. I think one good one to consider is just for social media platforms, making sure that content posted to social media is accessible. Our estimate is about $8,500. And then also for really looking at the web piece of it, how to publish accessible content using a CMS or various other similar systems, our estimate puts at about $16,000. Finally, really think about how you want to implement processes. Remediation is going to resolve your accessibility gaps in the short term, but process is really how you address this in the long term. Remediation, we can fix things. I can provide you something that is completely fixed. But if the person who updates that page next doesn't know about what they need to do to make sure it's accessible, they could really undo that work unintentionally. So making sure you have these processes, you have the training in place for everyone. You're performing kind of regular accessibility testing to stay on top of where things are and have a picture of where you're at. And then also making sure that you're looking at procurement and how you work with vendors on accessibility issues. And just another shout out for that accessibility request process, making sure you have a robust process in place. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just want to say, make sure that a transition plan, if you adopt it, is updated at least annually to reflect progress. It is intended to be a living document. It is intended to change to kind of reflect the direction the city is choosing to take. So some of the events you may want to consider additionally updating it on are as you reach those remediation milestones, as you make changes to your processes, or whether someone new is made responsible for ADA coordination. All right, so really the final two things I would like to leave you all on is I want to emphasize that accessibility is a continuous process. It is not something you do just once and it's fixed forever. It is also not something, as been mentioned multiple times, you're not really trying to reach 100% accessible. That is your goal to eventually get there or get as close as you can to it. But in many ways, that's an unrealistic goal because technology is changing every day. There's new things that come out or something comes out and it breaks something else. The other thing to consider too is the websites in the city is not static. They're constantly changing as well. And I would also, it's funny, Karen mentioned cybersecurity either. I would also liken it to that. When we're looking at security activities, you know, our goal would be to be 100% secure. No one can ever steal someone's data or have an incident. But it's a continuous process to stay on top of that. The final thing I would also like to share is that accessibility is really about people. Our web content accessibility guidelines are a wonderful tool to get there, but guidelines are somewhat limited and they can't capture the full experience of people. We use that as a tool to help figure out how to get there, but what we really want to accomplish is to make sure that everyone in our community, our visitors, people who are coming to visit the town and need information, that regardless of the ways that they choose to access information, and for someone who's disabled, it may be the only way that they have to access that information, that it works well for them, that they can access it, that they can be engaged with their community. So I think it's really important to keep this in mind, especially when you can get kind of bogged down in the technical details. So thank you very much for listening to me today.
Okay, thank you. Mitchell, do you have, well, I was going to ask you if you had more.
No, I don't have anything more. So thank you, Stacy, for that excellent presentation.
Okay.
At this time, do we want to open it up for council questions?
I think we probably do want to open it up to questions. I guess one of the things I'd like to know is where we're at with all this and what we still need, but let's go ahead and open it up to council, and maybe some of your responses will clarify some of that. Council, questions? Judith?
Just a clarification question. Your presentation was amazing. I had to copy some of this data, including going back to the bill and really do a deep dive into it to understand it. But and maybe this is obvious to others, but when we look at hiring a full-time ADA coordinator versus a hybrid approach, so we'd have that cost. When we look at slide 25 of 30, where you're estimating the costs of the remediation and training costs, are those costs in addition to what the city would need to look at budget-wise, in addition to the salary we're looking at paying an ADA coordinator? So
Yeah, thank you. I think it really depends, and it depends somewhat on who you hire and then kind of what your timelines are and how much they're able to accomplish, especially as one person. If they are capable of performing remediation, if they can do all of it, I think it's going to be a much longer timeline, which does increase your risk. But you would not necessarily have to pay those costs. Now, the other thing to consider is maybe they can perform some of that remediation, and then some of that could be performed by a third party as a vendor. And training, I would look at it a very similar way. Like if they have the skills to provide that training and that advice in-house, then that would just be really part of their salary. But depending on their skills or your very, specific needs or what seems most pressing at the time, it may still make sense to reach out to an outside vendor.
What I would add to that is remediation is not going to be cheap no matter how we do it. I think the bigger question is the timeline that we feel comfortable with remediating the documents that need it in that priority list that Stacy was talking about earlier.
Hey, Mitchell, this is Mark. I wanted to add too that it's going to be hard to find a coordinator that could remediate and be a specialist in every area as well. So that's just another point, because like Karen mentioned, this is across all your digital assets, which could include kiosks and other things. So it's going to be difficult. You can hire an experienced person, but it would be difficult for them to be experienced enough to remediate and handle all of that by themselves.
I second that. And I've done this for 10 plus years as a coordinator, and I was trying to do it 50% of the time. It was an impossible feat. So we had to take a hybrid approach in my previous job. And we take a hybrid approach at the state too.
Thank you. Other questions, council? Natalie?
How much did we budget for this in our? Wish Becca was here, but I think this year we had 200,000 to get this moving forward. And if that's a coordinator or what that looks like, but that's what's in the budget, if I remember correctly, was 200,000. I do want to make a correction on the transition plan. On page 9, it says low priority April 1st, 2024. That's supposed to be April 1st, 2025. So we do need to make that correction on that transition plan, and I apologize for that error.
Okay, thank you. This seems like a pretty daunting task, multiple platforms, multiple user interfaces. And this is a state mandate. And further, there's a bill in the House now, the Colorado House 1168, equal access to public meetings, which is a noble thought, but it also comes with an expense, and it's an expense the state doesn't help with. It just saddles the various municipalities and counties around the state with having to pay this. I did talk to the mayor from Fountain, and she referred me to their ADA specialist who started off. This is a woman who was working in the engineering department, the planning department in Fountain. She was working some of the ADA issues like sidewalks and so forth, physical structures, and then she took some classes and became certified to be their ADA compliance person for IT. She does work with an IT vendor in Colorado Springs for help. They came up with a transition plan, a plan basically to show the state that they're trying to fix this. I mean, it's a budget issue for them as well. And they're a city of almost 30,000 people versus us. So they're about 6 times bigger than us. I guess one thought that I was entertaining earlier on is that maybe we could use a part-time person and have that person, if they weren't fully qualified, that they could take the online classes and qualify. The written test is required. It's open book. So I don't know that, that's one option. It's the cheaper option. I do think, I've heard this is going to be contested, that some municipalities are going to try to get the state to lighten up on this a little bit. Do we have other comments from council?
And I could just add one thing just to give you a little perspective. There are penalties for not complying. So, there's the potential that you'll save some money by spending some money, but just as a heads up, the Colorado law, gives people the right to get court orders and requiring you to comply, monetary damages. And I think the fine is $3,500 per plaintiff per violation. And then the real fun one is, attorney's fees are recoverable too for plaintiffs. So that's always the one that scares people the most. But not that, not to scare anybody, but there are some ramifications potentially for not complying.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
So it sounds like from the presentation that there really isn't anything specific or concrete or like a red line defining compliance. Is that right? Like if we have a 5-year plan to come into compliance, or if we have a 2,000-year plan, maybe that wouldn't fly, but there's no bright line for us to know how much do we have to do per year to be in compliance, or what percentage of our budget are we required to spend in order to be in compliance, or what simple dollar amount. Like we don't have any standard against which to measure reasonableness of compliance. At least that's what I've heard. Is that correct? Whoever, maybe, I don't know.
I can take it.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between the Colorado House bill requirements and the regulations. Like the House bill requirements were strict. They basically
Jeff, can you get a little closer to the mic,
yeah,
please?
I'm sorry. Yeah, the House bill requirements are different than the new regulations. So the statute has some pretty strict
deadlines and requirements. You have to comply with WCAG 2.1 AA standards by July 1, 2024. You have to have a plan in place by that date. But the regulations basically said, well, you know, I think basically recognizing that, you know, this is like going to be impossible for almost anybody in Colorado to comply with, any jurisdiction to comply with, said that you have to basically have, then you get to your standard, which is have to have like a reasonable plan, you know, be working towards compliance in a reasonable manner. And that's going to differ for every organization, right? So you're right. It is a little bit wishy-washy. What's going to be reasonable, what's not going to be reasonable. And then, you know, being a lawyer, I'm sure you recognize that regulations that don't reflect the law sometimes are not valid. There's valid. They're not basically, you know, you can have a law that says this and a regulation that changes the law.
Yeah, but
the
if
law
we're
wins.
complying with the regulations, they're not,
Well,
I would take issue with that
Well,
last comment.
yeah, you know, I'm just out, you know, laying out the issue that is that, you know, there's plaintiffs, private plaintiffs may take a different approach than the state would take, right? State's not going to say, hey, you're not complying with the law and our regulations allow you to do this. It's going to be a private plaintiff, right? Right.
That's different than suing the
Right.
municipality.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, I think the short answer is that I know you saw some sort of shrugs. It is difficult to know what's reasonable. So I think the states with the regulations has tried to basically provide flexibility. They've tried to allow organizations to basically not comply with the technical standards perfectly, but then have a process that you can accommodate people when they ask for an accommodation. So yeah, this document here on your website's not accessible because for these reasons, or this isn't whatever. And you can say, well, I'd like to see that. And then you can make it accessible, and that's a reasonable accommodation, even though it doesn't comply with the standards up front. So I'm happy to hear somebody say anything different, who are the experts here, but that's my understanding of how the law works right now.
Okay, Nancy?
Yeah, I just was wondering what the specific outcomes are you're looking for tonight. So I assume one of them is to approve the plan. Am I correct in that?
That is correct, yes.
And the second is if we want to hire somebody part-time, full-time, assign it to an existing employee or work with the contractor.
We would like to have direction from council as how to proceed with budgetary considerations as well as timeline and risk factor considerations.
Okay, great. So my recommendation is that the plan seems appropriate, very complex. There's a lot in there to accomplish, but I like plans and I think it's a good way to structure how we move forward in the future. Secondly, my recommendation would be to hire an ADA coordinator who knows what they're doing and get started on these requirements that are in the plan. And I say that because I just think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you for that, Karen. Nancy, I'm sorry. I saw that Karen had raised her hand up on the screen after Jeff's last comment. So if Karen, do you have something to add to what Jeff said?
I had a couple of things just real quick. One thing to just remember is compliance with the rules that we promulgated equals compliance with the statute. And that's what Mitchell was talking about in terms of you don't necessarily have to have everything by July 1st completely accessible. It's about having that plan, showing continuous progress and providing those accommodations. The spirit of the law is we're trying to give access to people. So just keeping that in mind, if you have prioritized your work, which this plan seems to kind of outline that, and you're showing your best faith effort and you're documenting all of that, that means that you are in compliance. If you're following those steps in the rules and doing that work, that equals being in compliance. The other thing I was just going to mention is in terms of the coordinator, I know there was a mention about 50% of the time. This is just a personal kind of opinion based on experience. I would recommend not trying to go the cheaper way and going with a part-time person. I agree. I think it was Nancy who said, I would like to go with a trained, experienced coordinator. I just think that it's a good idea to do that because you're going to spend a lot of time, money, and effort trying to get that person up to speed, and they won't get the traction they need and that coordination work that they need to do by doing it half-time and not having the full skills they need. So that was it.
Julie?
In response to that comment, I would suggest that just because someone is part-time doesn't mean they're inexperienced or they don't know what they're doing. So your comments seem to suggest that full-time people are ready to, roll right away and don't need any further education, and part-time people don't. But I would imagine it's possible to hire an experienced part-time person or to share that person with another municipality.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. I would separate those two thoughts, but I agree with you. You can have a part-time person who is highly skilled. I think the idea is having somebody who is skilled and experienced, and in this work, they're always going to be learning more. They're always going to be continuing their education on this work. The B part is if you have it part-time, you can do that, but it will slow down your efforts.
Thank you. I guess Denise, maybe you can help clarify this, or maybe it's a Denise Ann Mitchell question is, okay, so as we look at this presentation, I think we've paid for some things, we've gotten some things. It's not clear to me what we have and what we really need next. So maybe if I had it would help me. Hopefully it'll help the rest of council. If you can tell us what we've got and what we really need, that might narrow the problem down.
Mayor, what we got was basically a lot of training, which was important, and it's training that we can use over and over. We also got an assessment of where we are and where the high level priorities, medium level, and low priorities. So we got an assessment of where we are, and also conversations with our vendors that needed to take place to say, we need to look at this, we need to look at this, we need to, so those conversations have taken place. What we now have to do is adopt a plan, whatever plan council would like to adopt, and then we need a way to move forward with that plan. So we need to fix the high priority items, we need to fix the medium priority items and the low priority items that were outlined and were assessed, and then continue to manage that as we move forward. So that is how we need to move forward at this point.
Okay, I guess one of my thoughts in approaching the problem is, okay, if we look to the future and say, henceforth, we'll do all this stuff and make it compliant. And then going backwards, would it be possible that if we didn't make great progress there, we would respond to somebody who needs documentation? In other words, it's sort of analogous to, ordering a book from the library, a core request or something. If somebody decides they need the 1936, sewer plat lines or something, we would go out and get those for them or whatever. But as opposed to going and doing all that on the possibility that maybe somebody would someday want that.
And I think that's the risk, that's the risk that the council needs to make, right? And give us direction. We will definitely have, that's one of the things that we need to do is put a process in place of who do they contact? How do we get it done? How quickly can we get it done? That's part of this plan that we have to put in place. And then council needs to decide what's the risk factor that they're willing to take for this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Julie, go ahead.
Well, in terms of the risk factor, which is what I'm thinking about as well, it sounds like Jeff is telling us, and that we're hearing, that as long as we're making progress, and it has to be reasonable progress, which is in the eye of the beholder, I would suggest, we can make progress. We don't necessarily have to spend $200,000 in 1 year in order to avoid a lawsuit. We just have to make progress.
Thank you. Judith.
First of all, again, I'd like to applaud the effort. What I really appreciated about this report was not only did you indicate the high, medium, and low priorities and then accessory issues and color coded them, but it gave me a very clear picture as someone who doesn't know you know, and doesn't, and it doesn't need these things. I was trying to look at it from the standpoint of someone who would need to, you know, who would be challenged in a way that they'd need to access our information in a special way. When I look at this now, kind of knowing everything that you've gone through, I can't remember how many pages this was, like 195 pages. It was a lot. When we look at a hybrid approach, and, you know, the low end is $5,000 a month. We're talking that, you know, that's a $60,000 salary without benefits. I guess I'm at the point where, because this is going to be an ongoing issue over time, and we have definitely some things we need to remediate in the short term. I support Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune's approach of accepting the report tonight, which I thought was very thorough, and hiring someone as an ADA coordinator, given working within the budget that we approved, and start moving forward with this.
Thank you. Other comments from council? So I'm still trying to figure out what we essentially need. I guess we have the plan. I think is that correct? And my understanding is that's critical. Sorry, Mitchell.
Correct. We have the plan. We have to make an adjustment with a date, but the plan is the framework for the organization to become in compliance, making the good faith effort to have our digital content accessible.
Okay, and then when we ask the question, for instance, what would it cost to make everything going into the future good and then go back and clean up, for instance, the high priority things, and we ask for a price tag, it's really hard to get a feel for what that might be, because it depends. Do we use do we use a vendor? Do we use a part-time person? Do we farm some of it out? Do we do it all in-house? And that's kind of where I'm struggling. This isn't like buying a car where you go down and you see the sticker and then you can think about it. Mitchell, you've been thinking about this for a while. Maybe you've got some thoughts you can share.
The remediation needs to happen regardless. So I think that as an organization, as a council, we need to decide how long we're willing to let that process happen. And that's the risk factor that we're kind of discussing here. There's always the possibility that one of those items that we haven't gotten to yet is something that an individual with a disability comes across and ends up taking the city to court because of that. My brain is not big enough to be able to do this myself. And so I am happy to hear that some council members are considering hiring a person to be able to help this organization in the path forward. The big thing for me is that the remediation portion of this needs to happen. How long it takes, I think, is the council's decision.
Okay, thank you. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you've been dealing with this, and it was similar when Alex was on the spot, and it's granted, a lot of government things it's not easy to figure out what the best thing is. Well, council, I'm wondering if we were to do something like to adopt a plan for a year, give it a try, and then we'd have a chance to reassess it. And right now, I don't know if that plan should be a full-time individual like Nancy has suggested, or half-time. But I am kind of thinking if we would commit to do this for a year and see how far we can get and make sincere good progress on that. That would be one thought. I'd like to hear others if anybody's got another idea. Well, for the sake of argument, let's suppose we had two proposals on the table. We'll state them, and then if somebody's got a different approach, we can do that. And then I'd like to go around the table and kind of kind of see if we can get a feel for this. Suppose we went for a half-time person, or we were going to spend that money for a half-time equivalent versus a full-time person, but we were going to do that for a year. That's really kind of a budget question. Yeah, Julie, yeah.
Before we go around the table, I think, at least for me, I need to know, what are you talking about? Are you talking about an independent contractor? You're talking about an employee? I don't know. I'm guessing those numbers we saw on the screen about the price would be for an independent contractor and not if the city had to hire the person and give them all the benefits and everything, but just for clarification, I don't know what we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I understand. I'm sorry. It's vague and I guess I'm going to have to drill down. So I'm going to back off that.
But maybe we can get an answer. Was that number supposed to be for an independent contractor or for an employee in our budget? In our city?
Yeah, I can answer
Stacy?
that.
The 5 to 8 grand, I think it
Yeah,
was.
the numbers I provided were for reaching out to an independent contractor.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Mark at
Public
Nelnet. So I wanted to add, that was an independent contractor to work with a coordinator. So those numbers we worked with you was just acting as a contractor to help that coordinator. It wasn't taking on the whole coordination role.
No idea.
So I just wanted to make sure we clarified that.
Yeah, and hi, my name is John Vilpond. I'm with Nelnet as well. So just to clarify is.
Sorry, sir, Mitchell, could you trade places with him so he can sit down? And you need to, I'll ask you to reintroduce yourself and your title and then be about 3 inches from the microphone when you're speaking, sir.
Yeah, hi, John Vilpondo from Nelnet as well. I help run our business development efforts. So to clarify on the rate, that is also Nelnet's contracted rate that we have an enterprise agreement with the state of Colorado. And so we are providing we have an hourly rate that's negotiated as part of that enterprise agreement, and that would be Nelnet's rates. So any other independent contractor may be lower or maybe higher. We go with a hybrid rate of $123.19 per hour. So you can do the math and figure out how many, I think it's between 40 and 60 hours. So that is our rate, not the suggested rate that you would go and find a different independent contractor. They could be higher, they could be lower. That's just the rate that we have.
May I ask a follow-up?
Okay, well, yeah, please, Julie.
So it's your employees that you have employees at Nelnet who do this as well as others? Is that
Yes,
what
we
you're
have
saying?
a full
So-
team of, sorry.
So the 5 to 8,000 a month that was on your spreadsheet would be if we hire one of your employees to be our independent contractor or your business to be the independent contractor.
Correct.
So what's the difference between the 5 and the 8?
Just number of hours. That's the difference between about 40 hours and 60 hours a month.
Oh, it's hourly.
Well, I mean, that's yes, that's essentially what it comes out to.
You're saying 40 to 60 hours a month?
So 5 grand a month could be full-time, and is that what you're saying?
No, full-time would be 160 hours a month.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know how to do months. Let's talk about a week.
Yes,
What's
40 hours
a
would be
week? What would that cost us? 40 hours a week?
about $5,000.
Thank you.
So that would be about
That would be
20,000.
5,000 a week, 20,000 a month.
Yeah, actually a little more.
But what our team is suggesting is they think with a hybrid approach, you would only need, in this case, Nelnet services for, let's call it 40 hours a month, in addition to a potential coordinator. So we're saying that's what we believe you would need from Nelnet services.
We'd have to hire a full-time coordinator and hire you for 40 hours a month? Is that what I heard?
If I can jump in, John.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. I don't
Yeah,
get it.
so what that proposal is based on is taking a hybrid approach. So we would be looking on your side, this would be a part-time coordinator, whether that is, someone takes that on as part of their role. Or, maybe even if some of these duties were spread out across multiple people. But we would need a coordination point who really works with that contractor. And then based on the estimated work, looking at the inventory and the scope of things we anticipated to provide those support services, to provide that accessibility expertise, and then also working with vendors on follow-up retesting, verifying that they have fixed the issues that they said they have. We estimated about 40 to 60 hours a month. Does that clarify?
And something I'd like to know, we do something very similar for the city of Portland. So the city of Portland doesn't have a accessibility coordinator right now. They created a bunch of champions. So there's a bunch of champions from different departments, and then they employ Nelnet and a couple other firms to be those experts and provide that expertise. So
Yeah, Julie, can you turn your microphone on? Sorry, and could you repeat that, please?
Can you tell us what a champion is? It sounds like a superhero. I want to know what you're talking about, and I don't remember the definition. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. When we're looking at like a departmental champions approach, it's really kind of a program where you have one person in each department who takes the lead in pursuing this. And often it's as additional duties on top of the role that they are already performing.
Did that help? Okay, good, okay. Judith,
Based on Mayor Pro Tem Fortune's suggestion, I'd like to split this discussion into two votes. One, voting on the digital accessibility transmission plan, and then further discussion on how we're going to implement that. And I'd like to start that with a motion to approve the digital accessibility transition plan as presented.
Second.
Can we just make the change that the low priority moves from April 1st, 2024 to
Oh,
April
yes,
1st,
yes,
2025?
with the date changes as indicated by the city administrator. Thank you.
okay, so it's open to discussion. Guess question, Denise, that's what we've already had done, right? Or is that a true statement?
No, we have to adopt it. And then based on adoption, then we'll have to move forward and hit these goals or do the best that we can. We may have to change them based on as we move forward. But that is the remediation plan that we can give to the state saying we've adopted this plan, which is required by July 1st.
I guess I mean, yes, it's a plan. It's not results. Okay, so that's adoption. Julie?
This is a question for Jeff. So if we adopt a plan and it has deadlines in there, does that put us in a dangerous position if we're not able to meet those deadlines?
You know,
Or I guess worded another way, is it wiser for us to adjust the plan that's been presented in terms of the aggressive deadlines?
yeah, I think if you have deadlines that you think you can meet and that are reasonable, it'd be fine. I think the plan is a plan, right? So it can be amended as you go along. So if you have deadlines that you think are appropriate, I don't see an issue with that. And then if you're not making them, then you can make an adjustment as long as you're making progress.
But yeah, I understand we can adjust the plan over time, but specifically what I'm wondering about is if our plan says we're going to do X by such and such a day, then we can get in trouble if we've not met our own deadline. But if we say X will be done a year from such and such a day, then we're protecting ourselves from getting sued because we never promised we were going to get it done right away anyway. So I'm just wondering if legally, I would guess, but I don't know, that if we have a plan that we haven't complied with in terms of our own deadlines, that doesn't look good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought would be is that it depends upon the reasonableness of your deadlines. If you're putting them out a year and that's not reasonable, although I don't think it's unreasonable for most of what you're trying to do here, then I don't think it makes any difference that you comply with the unreasonable deadline, right? So
Yeah, well, that's the other extreme.
yeah,
So we want to find some place in the middle, or does it not matter if we have aggressive deadlines? It's a little scary to me to have an aggressive deadline because
yeah, I think your
if you
question
can
is-
only meet it with some heroic, 60-hour-a-week employee consultant, earning $200,000 a year, then I mean, it just seems like to me that we should have a plan that we're adopting that's flexible, that's reasonable in terms of deadlines, but not crazy, like where we say we're
Yeah.
going to get started in 20 years. That obviously won't fly.
Yeah, I think my point would be is you should pick reasonable deadlines that you think you can make with your budget. And give yourself enough cushion that you can make it. But not to the point where you're just making these deadlines too far out. They're not reasonable. So I think, yeah, I agree. I wouldn't make an heroic deadline that requires you to spend a ton of money that you don't have. I'd try and make it reasonable and then rely on your ability to change if you can't make it.
Well, then I'd like to know if we can reasonably anticipate that we can meet the deadlines within the plan. And if so, what does that look like? Does that look like $200,000 a year? Does that look like part-time, $5,000 a week? What, I don't know.
Good
I'd
question.
like to know that before I have to vote.
Very very good. Nancy has a comment.
Yeah, my assumption was that, and the deadlines looked appropriate to me. And the assumption from the briefing was that if we had a full-time coordinator, that those were reasonable deadlines. I'm looking at.
Well, if that's the case, then it makes it difficult. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm speaking out of turn.
No, I'm looking for confirmation.
I'm
of that.
sorry. Julie, go ahead. Comment, please.
I was going to say, if that's the case, and that makes sense, Nancy, then it's difficult to bifurcate the issues the way Judith suggested, to separate them. Because if the plan we adopt is going to be impossible unless we have a full-time person, then we shouldn't adopt the plan and then decide later if it's going to be a full-time person. I think the decision would have to go together.
And just from
Let's
the.
see Nancy and then Denise. Go ahead, Nancy.
I just want to say, I want to reiterate again that this is the right thing to do. And I don't see, trying to just kick the can down the road on this. I don't think we're going to gain anything or by going cheap on this. So that's my opinion on it.
Okay, thank you. Denise?
So by fixing the high priority and medium priority this year and this is an estimate. I want everybody to know it's an estimate. On their slide of number, whatever it is, it says the high priority and medium priority is about $99,000 to get those corrected this year. We have that is budgeted if council so chooses to do that. And then the low priority is about 54,000 that needs to be completed by April. So those are the budgets that we're looking at as we move forward. If you want to change that and move this plan and say, we will have high, medium, and low by 2025, and we'll bring all of them at that point. We can look at doing, I think there's some risk with that, but I would have to defer to our attorney for it of how you would like to proceed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a minute. We'll take Judith first.
Just for discussion purposes, I just want everyone to know that I'm referring to the digital accessibility transition plan, and I'm looking at page 7, starting with the milestone timelines. So my rationale in wanting to vote on this first is that if council does pass it, then I was thinking the next step would be to see what kind of infrastructure in terms of employees, part-time, full-time people that we would need to implement this plan. But I just want to say, if there is a motion and a second on the floor, if we're going to do a friendly amendment, then we need to look at changing the milestone timelines. Thank you.
I apologize, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to go. If you need to reach out to me, Mitchell has my contact information. You can also reach out to the State of Colorado's Technology Accessibility Program. Our email address is oit_accessibility@state.co.us. But I apologize, I have to go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Karen,
Karen.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I also want to comment that the plan calls for annual review of the plan. So not to be forgotten.
Okay, thank you. As the discussion continues, I'm looking at slide 25 of 30, and that's where it gives costs for high priority, medium priority, low priority, and then a total of $154,150. Okay, so again, if this were a car, I'd want to look at a sticker price. If we were to, I guess I'm going to ask you, if we spent that amount of money, if we budget that amount of money, $154,150, and we gave it a year, can we get a lot done? Can we fix this? It's a question.
Could I also ask again to clarify that with a full-time employee, they can do a lot of the remediation themselves, correct? That was my understanding in the briefing, right?
Okay, right. Now, okay, I'm sorry. If we spent the 154, however we were to spend it, if we budgeted that amount of money and then tried to figure out the best way to do it, I guess that's kind of my question. What do you get basically for $150,000?
Sure. So to provide a couple of points of clarification on the numbers we quoted. So that amount is focused on that remediation piece. So this is for fixing existing issues that you have out there. And primarily the work is reviewing all of the content, all of the pages that are existing, and working to make updates on each of them as needed. And those numbers do include, I believe, some documents, but not necessarily all. And especially with the training that was provided, I think a lot of that focus would be on city staff to make sure that these documents are updated. And this was also because I don't have numbers for the full number of documents or number of pages at this time to provide an estimate of that. To clarify the point about a full-time coordinator, if you hire someone who is skilled in digital accessibility and has the skills to perform remediation themselves, yes, I believe they can perform much of this work. I do think it would be a very aggressive timeline for them with the dates currently in the transition plan. I think you would have to consider maybe extending them out a bit. I would say for a full-time coordinator, it really depends on their skill level, how quickly they're able to get up to speed, start accessing systems, and start getting in there to make, the updates needed for remediation. And then how is this going to be balanced against the additional need for developing processes, and then also looking at your training needs.
Thank you, Judith.
What's the average salary with benefits for a full-time ADA coordinator?
That is an excellent question. Unfortunately, I can't answer that for you. Sorry.
I'm asking because to segue with the mayor's slide 25, we need to look at slide 23, which with the hybrid approach, you're saying that it's $5,000 to $8,000 per month, excluding the remediation fees. So what I'm trying to figure out and why I wanted to split it into two discussions is that if we hire a full-time ADA coordinator who can do much of this remediation, what is in the best interest of the city financially to do so? Because, if we hire a full-time ADA coordinator, then we have them here full-time. Yes, we have to do benefits, but it's different than having a consultant have to come in, frequently. And so that's why I'm leaning toward, adopting the plan. It does have, we can modify that. We can update that. These are aggressive and assertive timelines. But again, this is just a plan. This is just a footprint. It's a framework that we can come back and revisit. But if we don't even know what we're looking at from the salary standpoint, I mean, I don't know if Denise, if you can, if you looked into this at all and could give us a ballpark to work with.
I would say it's going to be around 95,000.
Hey, this is Mark Balzano from Nelnet. Can I make a suggestion that might help things along? So if you looked at hiring an ADA coordinator, working with Mitchell and looking at this plan as they get experience, then they can make suggestions on the plan. The plan should be a living document, so making changes on it should not be, we shouldn't be thinking you can't make changes on it. You have to have reasonable reasons you move. But my suggestion is to get your coordinator in place and work with Mitchell to look at all this detail and data and then start figuring out how much they can do in-house and how much they would need contractors. So I don't know if you could do that whole budget tonight, or if you should start with the ADA coordinator to really start digging into this plan. Hope that made sense.
Thank you. Julie.
I'm sorry, I forget your name.
It's Stacy.
Stacy just said she thought our plan was very aggressive. I don't want to pass a very aggressive plan. I want to pass a reasonable plan because we can get sued if we don't stick to our plan. So why should we go for a pie in the sky plan? It doesn't make sense to me. I would much rather overperform, but I'm not going to commit to a plan that necessarily I'm already told is fairly unrealistic.
Is
Thank
this,
you.
is this an unrealistic plan or is it an ambitious plan?
Yeah, I would like to make a point of clarification. If you are looking at solely hiring a full-time coordinator and meeting all the dates currently in the plan, that is what I find as, maybe more aggressive. And I would really be looking at when that person is onboarded, one of their first tasks is to review the plan and start really, digging into those details and getting a better assessment of what is possible from the position they are in. If you are looking at a hybrid approach or some other approach where there's outside vendor support, I think it is very possible to meet these dates.
And a point of clarification there too, a coordinator is going to be one person. Outside vendor has the potential to be numerous people, right? Well, because a coordinator, a one person won't be able to get that amount of work done by a July 1st, or they just, no one on our team could get it done by July 1st, one person. There's numerous people on this project. I don't know. There's probably 2 or 3 people at a time working to put the report out. And that's the same way that you would do with a vendor.
I was going to just mention, I'm sorry. I was just going to mention, like,
go ahead.
Stacy had mentioned, I'm sorry, there's a delay. Stacy had mentioned having a coordinator. You do have a person with your city that has all the knowledge they need to know. You're not going to have that if you just have contractors everywhere. There is going to still have to be someone to gather knowledge. And Jeff, on the law, even with a plan, it doesn't mean you're not going to get sued. It just means that you have a reasonable explanation and that you're working toward making the plan better, correct? I just wanted to make that clarification. Having a plan in place, especially if it's not aggressive enough, doesn't stop you from getting sued. It's just, it's your support, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure that if you have a plan with aggressive deadlines that you don't meet or a plan with non-aggressive deadlines that you do meet, it actually changes your liability. I think you just got to be reasonable. So I guess nobody knows what that really means. But I do think that it's important, as Councilmember Wolf pointed out, that the city needs to be able to have a plan that it believes it has the staffing to be able to make reasonably. It doesn't have to be perfect, and maybe being more aggressive makes it less likely to make those, or being less aggressive makes it more likely to make those. So there's going to be a ton of wiggle room there, but you certainly don't want to have a plan that you're like, yeah, there's no way we can make this. That's definitely not going to work. So.
Thank you. Michelle?
How long have your software vendors been doing this, working with other businesses?
We are the software. We're not a software vendor, but we're a professional services firm. So we've been doing this for 3+ years in the external accessibility space. Nelnet is the largest student loan provider in the country. So we've been doing this for 15+ years on our student loan platform, making sure that stuff is accessible for individuals that need to come in and make payments on their student loans, etc. Does that answer your question?
Denise?
I was just going to mention, we have over
Denise has the floor, sir.
Mayor, I'd like to make a recommendation and see if council would be okay with this. I understand that the plan has some concerns regarding aggressive, and I don't know how all of council feels, but what if we made the high priority that they would be done January 1st of 2025, which gives us a little bit more time. Medium priority by June 1st, 2025, and low priority by October 1st, 2025. And then we as staff will come back with you with an exact plan of how we can make those deadlines and what it's going to cost. And we'll work with Nelnet and others to really look at that and see what the exact cost would be to hire someone. I gave you a general idea. I will tell you, I think it's going to be very challenging. I've seen it being advertised in various cities to try to find an ADA coordinator with the training that's required for this, the accessibility. It's challenging to find individuals with that expertise right now, is what I'm finding. But if that would work, maybe we can get the plan adopted and then we'll come back with more details to help council move forward on this, if that would suffice.
Okay, Denise, I guess I don't quite understand. Okay, you're extending the deadlines. Were you recommending an ADA coordinator, similar to what Nancy
I
was
believe we're
proposing?
going to have to do an ADA coordinator, but I want to come back with exactly what the ADA coordinator full-time would be. So we have the exact cost. I have a preliminary amount, how long it may take us to get it, and then the additional support that we're going to need so we can give you that entire budget as we move forward. So I think we gave you some pretty good numbers tonight, but I feel like there's still some questions on that. Unless if council would like to go ahead and approve the ADA coordinator and we move forward, that would help us to get this project moving quicker. However, I understand there might still be some concerns and some questions that we need to answer.
Okay, thank you. Mark, did you want to speak, please? Mark, your lips are moving. We can't
I
hear.
was having trouble unmuting. No, y'all answered the question. I like Denise's plan. And I know we can't help y'all with the price, but I would tell you the price she quoted is common in the industry. I was just going to quote from an experience perspective. We have over 100 years of experience on our team. I've been in this field for over 15 years. I'm deaf myself, so I depend on assistive technology to make the world work. But yes, I would say, Denise, the 90 is probably the low range if you're going to really get someone experienced. Our ranges range much higher than that for our team, but there is people out there looking for work. So.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
I think that there's so much we don't know, but I think tonight we need to make some decisions. Obviously, we're being asked to do that. So I will rescind my original motion and I will propose a new motion to accept the digital accessibility trend.
Judith, I think the seconder is going to have to go along with that. Also have to rescind.
It's based on what Judith is going to propose for the next one.
You're okay with that, Nancy? Okay. Okay. All right. So go ahead, Judith.
I rescind my prior motion and introduce a new motion to accept the digital accessibility transition plan as presented with the dates that the city administrator has outlined for the corrections to the transition, or I'm sorry. It's on page 7. I don't know what you're calling it. Hang on. To the milestone timeline. Thank you.
Second.
Motion a second. Okay. Any further discussion? John?
Yeah, with regard to these dates that have been amended, I want to know how these connect in with this proposal. In the colored slides here with I'm assuming this maps to these high priority contact, 35,000, medium, 64,000, some low priority, right? Okay. So if I add all those numbers up, including the social media and the web. This is essentially your firm's basic proposal to us, right? That would implement this digital accessibility plan, correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Okay.
One point of clarification I want to make compared to the inventory, when we're looking at the high, medium, low, that is remediation only, focusing on that piece, and then the training as well. Additional services, such as, you know, that additional vendor support and items along that, that was priced out separately. That was the monthly rate that we gave. But that is something that I think could definitely easily be performed by your own coordinator. And so we would just take on, you know, the remediation pieces and the training pieces as one possibility.
Okay. Did that answer your question, John?
No, it didn't.
Then
So
Can
I
I-
add all these things up and I get $178,650 for everything on that slide. So I guess I need to understand what that costs for $178,000 with the timelines that are in the plan that so-called are aggressive, okay? Your firm could meet not the deadlines that Mrs. Howell said, but you could meet the deadlines that are in the digital accessibility document. Is that not correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct, assuming, you know, full coordination with the city and timely responses to any additional access that we would need.
So does that mean there's more costs than this 178,650? Help me with that.
The costs associated with the high, medium, and low priorities are just for the current remediation needs.
I understand that.
That doesn't, those prices don't include the ongoing support for this new law from the state in perpetuity.
I understand that. I mean, we're going to have to do this year by year. I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out how to kind of compare numbers and what are these proposals. Okay. So it sounds like to me, we have a vendor here that can meet these aggressive deadlines for 178.50. Okay. And we apparently, I'm not certain these slides are I'm assuming we would probably have to put this out for an RFP, given this amount. We couldn't just approve this particular vendor, correct?
Right, that's what I would, now we could do a sole
That's right.
source because they've done the work,
Right.
but I would do a
All
RFI.
right, so, and it seemed like the definitions as to what we're shown tonight, in my opinion, as somebody who's a computer scientist, those are rather vague to me in terms of what those deliverables are. Okay, they've found so many things on the main website for here and for there and the whole 9 yards. I have no idea what those are. Okay, and so I'm assuming if we did an RFP, we're going to have to be a lot more specific about what we want done, not just 4 things are fixed. So I'm just trying to figure out it sounds like to me that if we went the route of hiring an ADA coordinator, we don't even know how long it will take us to do that. Okay, right? We don't even know what the costs of that will be. We're not even certain that they would necessarily even agree with this laundry list of things that need to be fixed. They might come in and go, so I'm just trying to figure out, it seems like to me we have 2 proposals here. One is to essentially hire this company with this general scope of work for about 178,000 is their kind of guesstimate. And then we have this other thing, which is that we could hire an ADA coordinator, okay? And then we would do all this work in-house. Is that a reasonable explanation of what we have before us?
I think yes. The timeline is the biggest question around having a full-time coordinator doing the remediation by themselves. It will take one person a long time to be able to do all of that. So it goes back to the level of risk that council is comfortable with in that timeline to get the remediation done.
So given this assessment was done by your firm, correct, in terms of what was supposed to be fixed, in terms of you found, 4 things on the main webpage, that whole laundry list of things. Is there some more specificity to that list of things? Because if we did go the route of doing kind of an RFP, we would need to have that.
We are in possession of an audit with specific items, yes. Yeah, it was included in agenda documentation.
All right.
Now, keep in mind that audit was only the general assessment that Nelnet did, not every single item on every single page.
Okay, thank you. Judith.
Thank you. I also added up all those items on slide 25, and I also came up with 178,650, but that's only a part of the puzzle. And the bigger part of the puzzle for me is actually slide 23. Whereas in addition to, and tell me if I'm not correct on this, in addition to the cost of remediation, we have to choose 1 or 2 items. Hire a full-time ADA coordinator, or have the additional 5,000 to 8,000 costs per month in addition to the remediation in order for, this plan to be put in place if we don't go with a full-time ADA coordinator. Is that not what I hear you saying?
That is correct, yes.
And that's the great unknown, right? Because we don't know exactly how much a full-time ADA coordinator is going to cost plus benefits, but we also don't know how much of the $5,000 to $8,000 fee we will have to incur for someone to come in on an as-needed basis in addition to the $178,650. Just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So the $178,650 is not our fixed price. It's in addition to having some experts doing the work of the remediation, whether it's an ADA coordinator full-time here or it's a consultant coming in, correct?
I would defer to Stacy on the difference between the total cost of remediation and if the 5 to 8 is included in that cost, or if that is separate.
The 5 to 8 is separate from that cost, and that is focused primarily on more of kind of your longer term support activities. And so that is our estimate based on what I know of the work you have currently ahead of you. Again, I think it is a bit of a sliding scale. Like the more someone can do it internally, the less you need to rely on an external vendor to step in and help out with these additional pieces. And so maybe this is something that it does not make sense for the city to have a recurring monthly basis, but maybe more on an as needed sort of reach out, to get that additional expertise brought in, and that cost is only incurred when it is specifically needed. The other area I would look to too is, consider your procurement with your vendors. And for some of the activities I estimated is verifying that your vendors have fixed the issues with their websites. And those are some of the highest priority issues that we found. Can you lean on your vendors to provide some sort of independent verification that they have resolved the issues, and maybe they should incur that cost instead of the city incurring that cost as well? So there are a couple options there.
I see that Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to add that our remediation cost is in addition, and you did mention that, right, to a coordinator. Coordinator is going to be the person that says, we're going to do this site first, and they're going to coordinate having access to that site, knowing the right people to work with on that site. you need a coordinator, whether it's a part-time coordinator or a full-time coordinator or a contract coordinator. Someone has to do that. That 5,000 to 8,000, we gave very rough estimates because we were asked to. This really wasn't a proposal for us to sell to you. We were trying to help us know our costs. So all those costs are based on our contract with the state of Colorado. But the 5,000 to 8,000 was to supplement your coordinator and to do retesting, as Stacy meant, and do some remediation and do some of those things. It wasn't meant to be coming and do all your coordination. That's never what the price was there for. So all the pricing doesn't alleviate that you're going to need someone in the city to coordinate the activities.
Okay, thank you. I guess the more I think about this, and I don't think software ever comes easy or it ever comes in on time. I mean, almost invariably a rule in software is however much time you think it's going to take to test it, multiply by 3 and buy a lottery ticket, and it always goes longer. There's so many questions we have here, and this is such really, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's a can of worms, and this is something the state gave to us. I'm gravitating towards the idea that we should have an ADA coordinator who could come in and sort this out, that we would dedicate a certain amount of money to that and let them come in and really come up with a decent work plan. I think we gravitate to the idea that we want to hit the serious things, the high priorities first. We want to have a plan and we want to make progress. There's always risk, I think, of over-promising and under-delivering. So this whole schedule, although I can appreciate that Denise pushed the dates out, I'd even be inclined to maybe push them farther out once we had somebody in place. So I'm gravitating more towards Judith and Nancy's proposal there. Judith?
I'd like to call the question on the motion that is on the floor.
Okay, so we take a vote to see if we're going to take a vote. So we need
And the motion is just to accept the plan, not the.
No.
Just to accept the plan with the amendments
No,
on the date.
you're calling the vote. Okay, you would need a second, and then you would need 5 votes to pass to then vote.
I'll
Okay.
second.
Okay, so the motion is to call the question. So we need 5 votes or more to call the question, then we'll vote on the question if that passes. It has to be a supermajority or a majority. Well, no. Well, no, we actually have. I think every time we've done where we've called the question, we've gone with that. And the intent there, and this is Robert's rules, is that it's a 2/3 vote. Because if you didn't do that, then you'd frequently have, it gives a minority a chance to, well, I wouldn't say minority, but it gives a few people a chance to short circuit a discussion. So the question is, council, do you want to continue the discussion or not? So probably the simplest thing. And if Jeff, if you want to, I mean, yeah. No, that's. Well, let's vote.
The motion carries 6-1 with Counselor Shade as the no vote.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll vote on the motion. Just for the sake of clarity, if you could restate the motion and then we'll vote.
I move to approve the digital accessibility transition plan as presented with the dates modified per the city administrator.
Okay, everybody clear on that? Let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Turns out it didn't really make too much difference on that. Denise, I hope that gives you sufficient direction. Okay. And I think we've given Denise direction.
My motive for calling the question was to just approve the plan. And we were talking
Okay.
about the coordinator position while the motion was for the plan. So my rationale was get the vote for the plan done and then open discussion on.
Okay,
the
okay, my
coordinator
mistake.
position.
I got a little confused there. Okay, so we've adopted the plan. Well,
I'd like to move to direct Denise to hire a coordinator for this, a full-time coordinator for the city.
okay, do we have a
Second.
second? I'm sorry, Michelle, did you second? Okay, all right. Any discussion? Or see, Natalie?
I'm wondering if we should add something that, to work within the existing 200,000 that we budgeted. Is that something that we would want?
Could you say that again, please?
In addition to hiring an ADA coordinator, would we like to say something along the lines of, and work within the $200,000 budget that we've approved?
I would amend my motion to include that. Is there still the full 200? Was the current contractor paid for out of 2023 funds?
Yeah, some of them was out of 2023. I don't have an exact amount in that line item tonight. I'm sorry, Becca's not here, but some of theirs was paid out of 2023, but the majority of it was.
So then my motion is amended to say direct Denise to hire a coordinator to manage this plan within the limits of what is currently in the budget for this.
Okay, Michelle, are you good with that? You-
Second.
You seconded, okay. All right, further discussion? Julie?
If we've already allocated 200,000 and we've already been told it's going to be 179,000 to hire these guys. So if we have 179,000 hiring this consulting firm or
I'm-
some other firm,
I'm not
and excuse
proposing-
me, I'm talking. And if we're going to have to hire them for 179, 180,000, then if we're asking Denise to stay within the $200,000 budget, I just need clarification because what I've learned tonight is that a coordinator by themselves, it will not work, it will not fly. We'll never get it done and we'll get sued. If we just do hiring this consulting firm without getting our own coordinator, then we're looking at least $5,000, probably more per month or per week. I don't even remember what the heck it was. So we're way over the $200,000 budget. I just, so if we're just going to have some vague sentence that says Denise has to stay within the budget, I want to know what budget she's staying within. So I understand how much is left over to hire Nelnet.
Okay, thank you. We'll have Nancy and then Natalie.
Yeah, I'm not proposing that we hire a firm at this point in time. I'm simply proposing that we hire a coordinator within the budget.
Can Natalie?
And I guess just to clarify, that again, I am also in favor of hiring the coordinator with the understanding that we use the budget we've approved to implement the plan to the best of our ability this year. So there's that connection to it. So I'm just saying that I don't want to solve this can of worms. I want to say we've allocated this much money. I believe an ADA coordinator is part of that solution, but that ultimately the budget we've approved will be what we'll be utilizing to implement the plan.
Okay.
Well,
Ju-
can I?
oh, Julie, yeah, go ahead.
So I get that, but what I'm struggling with is if we're saying, okay, Denise, you have $200,000 to work with, go hire somebody, they might be 130,000. Oh boy, that means we can't even come close to hiring Nelnet to do much of anything. Oh boy, now we're way behind. Maybe it would have been smarter to do a part-time coordinator and therefore have more money left over to have Nelnet help us. So I don't feel like I have enough information to know if we have 200K to spend, what is the best way to spend it? I don't feel comfortable just saying, gee, Denise, go hire anybody and whatever's left over, we'll just figure it out later. I mean, maybe that's what we should do, but that's what it sounds like to me. Because it's so vague to say, hire someone within the budget, which I guess is another way of saying within what, last year's budget plus this year's budget, or I don't even know, it's too vague for me.
Okay, thank you. Nancy?
I would also say that if we need to budget more, which I'm sure we'll have to for next year, we can take that into account, or we can even amend the budget this year if we need to. But I think right now, my priority anyway is to get a coordinator hired so that we can get moving on the plan.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, so again, for sake of clarity, I'd ask to have the motion restated.
I move that we hire a full-time skilled coordinator to implement the plan, to initiate the process to implement the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Okay, and I mean, you amended it earlier for the not to exceed 200,000, I believe, so.
Yes, and thank you, to stay within the budget that we have for this year. So we can't go out and hire a $300,000 ADA coordinator.
Okay, let's vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Denise, I hope that provides sufficient direction there.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you,
Rachel,
Council.
Stacy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Right. Council, we are to receive or act on council correspondence. And then, of course, we have an executive session later. We can take a quick break. We're typically overdue from our typical time, or we could try to finish and then make the transition to executive session. Any druthers? Do you want to take a break before we do council correspondence? Or do you want to do council correspondence and then take a break? I don't think council correspondence is going to take too long, so let's do it. Then we'll take a break and we'll come back for executive session. Okay, so council correspondence, and I will start off. And first off, I want to apologize for last week for my behavior. Sorry, I feel bad about it. I lost and I regret it. Yeah, I think this council, we've got a lot of things done. I think we've got a good staff, and I think we can continue to good things for the city. So I don't mean to interfere with that. The job's kind of frustrating. I think we all know that, and I lost it last week. I recall a useful admonition that goes well in local government, probably in a lot of things in life, is to leave your ego at the door. So I will definitely try to do that more, tone things down. I think it's important that we focus, on what's good for the people, what's good for the citizens, what serves them, that we try to do the most good for the most people for the longest time. It's the rightful business of government. It's my intent to do that. And I've thought back a little bit to last week as to my frustrations. And I think in the future going forward, some things that would clarify matters and I guess in the interest of not triggering future chaos, one of the problems I think we've seen various occasions when materials have been added on, additions beyond what's in the council packet. They're presented during meetings. And last week, there was also a separate series of slides installed on the city's presentation system. In both cases, neither the public nor our full council had the opportunity to scrutinize and consider the material. It was a surprise, and council meetings are not good venues for surprises. So in the future, I think it's poor practice to add material to the council discussion after the packet is published. It puts the public at a disadvantage, as well as council members who may not have the opportunity to study last-minute addenda, or to anyone who's expected to be part of the discussion. However, if there's a compelling reason that additional material needs to be presented, councilors should notify the city administrator or the city clerk prior to noon on Monday. The city administrator or the city clerk may allow or reject the request or postpone the agenda item so that additional content can be added for a future council packet. No changes will be considered after noon on Monday. This should only be invoked in extreme situations and not used routinely. If the additional material requested is approved, it must be sent to council as expeditiously as possible. Otherwise, there'll be no handouts, no spreadsheets, nothing loaded on the city's display system. Also, a comment I have about emails and phone calls. I generally use email, sometimes phone. If I send a message out, Sometimes they expect an answer. I think an answer would be appropriate. If I don't get a response from council and under those circumstances, I'm not going to continue to pursue the matter. I will just assume the message was received and that you were not interested or saying no. So if you do want to talk to me, you know how to get hold of me. Thank you. Nancy?
I would recommend that that be incorporated into our SOP and our SOP approved for that addition.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
While I appreciate the apology, your outburst last week represents a pattern of behavior. I can recall 3 such outbursts in this year alone, and your second apology. So at this point, while again, I appreciate that you acknowledge your behavior, just a straight up apology is no longer acceptable. And I would like to point out that I can point to an executive session not that long ago where I was surprised with an entire slide presentation that I had no previous knowledge of. And because it's an executive session, I can't speak to that. But, and there's been a variety of times when we've had additions to the packet. I remember sitting in council session and having things handed to me and asked for 10 minutes to read it. So again, while I appreciate your apology, I hope it's sincere because of the pattern of behavior. I would like to see some additional action taken, not to exclude the possibility of anger management classes.
Thank you. Julie?
I have a different take on this. Since we get the packet on Friday afternoon or early Friday evening, and then we're required to read it, be prepared, brainstorm, sometimes confer with other council members for ideas and points of view. I certainly think that if someone is unable to notify the mayor or the city administrator that, oh, I have a new idea, or I have a hybrid idea from what's been presented, or I actually have 2 or 3 slides that might help inform the decisions so we can make a better decision for the residents. I think that's important. I would hate to have some rigid proposal or rigid rule where, oh, if you don't notify, the city administrator and the mayor by Monday and spend the whole weekend working on this, sometimes people go away for the weekend or they have other work to do. So, no, I refuse to cooperate with that. If I have an idea that I'm not able to present because of time constraints to the mayor and the city administrator before Tuesday night, I am sure as hell going to bring it up.
Okay, any other comments?
Only that I concur with that.
Natalie?
I'm just wondering if this should be an agenda item that we discuss formally, because it feels like we're violating correspondence.
That might not be a bad idea. Okay, anything else for council correspondence? Okay, let's go to Nancy.
Yeah, John had sent me a thing last week to accept on Sunday, which is the day before Earth Day, to accept a tree donation from the Earth Church. Because he was going to be out of town, so he asked me if I would accept it on behalf of the city council. I wanted to put that out to city council to see if everyone was okay to that. And also I was concerned because I know that there is a policy on accepting donations by para or in a park. Benches, trees, et cetera, have a very specific policy that they need to go through. And I didn't know if this was coordinated with them or not.
Good point. I am not sure about that.
I know that Matthew has been managing this, so I would assume, but that's an assumption, but he has been managing this donation. So I can definitely check into it, and he was copied on that email. So I don't know if he's had a chance to respond yet. Yeah, and there was also limits on I thought we had a policy on the limits of how the size of the trunks and so on. And
So it just seemed like there are processes that I thought we had put in place that I'm not sure if we were followed. So I was just, don't know if I can go, and if council even wants me to go and accept it on their behalf or not. They plan to plant it on Monday, which is actually Earth Day. I think it's a wonderful gesture. I would like to do it, but I don't want to violate any of the processes that we currently have in place. So I throw that out to the council.
Okay, I know Matthew had been involved in that. I guess the question there was the donations are apple trees, and I had questions about whether or not we used fruit trees. And Matthew came back and said that was okay, but the part about, the Parab, I'm not sure. Jillian, maybe you can clarify things.
Good evening, Council. Jillian Rossi, Parks and Recreation Director. I will say I do not believe this has gone through Parab. I know Matthew did receive the email inquiry and he will have a response by tomorrow about the size of the tree, the type of the tree, if we can accept the donation. But I don't believe this went through Parab. This was news to me when I saw the email. And I attend all the Parab meetings.
Okay, thank you. If you could go ahead and research that tomorrow. And then, just email Denise and she'll let council know.
Okay.
Okay, does that sound reasonable?
Well, if I could just ask, given that we'll find out if processes are being followed, is it okay with council if I accept it? If it's found out to be okay, if I accept it on behalf of council?
Have any objections? No objections, yeah, so you could go ahead, okay. City Administrator's report.
Just a couple of quick things is this Saturday, I believe the 20th, we are doing dumpster days. That was sent out to everybody. So that will be up at Public Works. We will verify residency. So it is only for our residents. And I do want to mention that mattresses and box springs, we will not accept. So I want to make sure, along with the other items that's there, but mattresses and box springs, we will not accept. And then we just heard today from Rubicon, this is a big thing that they're going to come and help us with Williams Canyon cleanout. And they're also going to help us with some fire mitigation in July. It does mean that they will be using this space, which is what they did several years ago, and they will be sleeping here, eating here for 3 days, but we have them for a total of 3 days, which is a very big benefit for our city. So we just got confirmation of that today. That's a big win for us. So.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Denise?
And I do want to say staff really appreciated the barbecue on Friday. So thank you for doing that. That was much appreciated. That's all I have.
Okay, great. And I forgot to mention, we will not have a work session next week. And the following Tuesday is the fifth Tuesday, so we won't have a meeting then. So the next meeting will be a regular meeting on that first Tuesday in May. Okay. All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and take a break and then we'll come back for executive session. And actually, I'll take the motion for executive session and that way we can get set up. So we have 2 executive session items. The first, an executive session to consider the purchase or sale of property for public purpose pursuant to section 5.1B of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter. Additional details concerning the specific property under consideration or other details cannot be disclosed without jeopardizing the purpose of this executive session. And then the second, an executive session to consider the purchase or sale of real property for public purpose, section 5.1B of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter for purposes of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators pursuant to section 5.1D of the Manitou Springs Municipal Charter concerning certain real property located in the city. So I would seek a motion to approve city council going into executive session for those 2 items.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Let's vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and take a break and we'll come back.